In this video, I'll teach you how to install an electrical subpanel, and I'll show you the entire process from start to finish. Now this video was designed so that someone with little to no electrical experience, they can successfully install a subpanel using only the information in this video, along with the additional resources that I'll talk about next. Now this video is broken into chapters, so if you're returning or you need to rewatch a section, you can easily navigate throughout the video. Just go to the description, click the link of the section you want to rewatch, and you can skip all of this. But if this is your first time watching, give me just a minute to explain how to use the additional resources, and then we'll get into it. The format and the amount of detail that I put into all of my tutorials are in direct response to my own personal frustration of having to go, from video to video, hoping that the next video is gonna fill in what the last one missed. And I like to work on my own vehicles, but I'm no mechanic, so I can never find a video that's specific to my vehicle, and there's always something missing. So once you have all the know-how or the basic understanding of how to do the project, what I think is the most difficult part is applying it to your situation. So with this tutorial, I did my best to fix that problem. Along with the help of Jason Bonham and Jeff Bonham, I'll show you how to install an 80 amp or 100 amp subpanel. And this is gonna work for most people watching this video. But if you're like me and you want everything perfect, the perfect amount of amps, you want the perfect brand and model of panel, the list goes on. Well, I've done all the work for you. I picked everything out for you. All you have to do is go to the description, click on the link, and download the shopping list. Then just take it to your home improvement store, or you can use the links and order everything on Amazon. But in addition to the shopping list, you can also download a written version of the tutorial. It's got quick facts that lists measurements and code info that you might want to print out and have ready while you're actually doing the project. But if this video helps you, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for other tutorial videos. Comment below if you have any questions. Thanks for watching. Let's get started.
Hey, thanks to Sergeant Donovan for asking me to talk to you about sub panels today, how to wire them, how to choose them, etc. We're doing a little project here where we need about 5 circuits. And so we had to decide, do we run to the main panel, 5 different circuits, or do we go ahead and just install a sub panel? Well, the decision was pretty easy here because we only had 2 circuits available in the panel. And so we decided to go ahead and run a nice size line over here and put the sub panel. So first thing you want to do is determine the amount of circuits that you need and the load that's going to be on those circuits. For example, if you're only going to have a 20 amp load, you could run a small line if you want, but it's far better to run a bigger circuit and put in a nice big panel so that you have room for future expansion. When you're choosing the panel, it really doesn't matter which brand you choose. They're all pretty good. You've got the GEs, Home Lines, and Siemens, etc. Generally speaking though, the more you pay for a panel, you're hoping to get a little better quality. Make sure that when you install the panel, you choose a location that's kind of centrally located. It's not allowed to be in bathrooms or clothing closets. So put it in an area that's going to be easily accessible, and certainly that's legal. As far as the height, you can never exceed 6 foot 7 inches to any circuit breaker. So bear that in mind. You also have to have 36 inches of clear working space in front of the panel and 30 inches of width. Now that width can start anywhere, like on the left side if you want, or if it starts on the right side, but there has to be that 30 inches of width and 36 inches of clearance in front of it.
When you install a subpanel, you're going to be required to get a permit and have it inspected. There's some exceptions where it may not be required, but you should still do it. The electrical inspector will be a resource throughout the process, and they're going to catch the mistakes that are so easy to make when you don't have the experience that a licensed electrician has. And these little mistakes, they have the potential to be deadly for you or anyone living in your home now or in the future. Once you have your location picked out, it's time to install the panel. Now there's several different ways to mount the panel. we're installing ours between the wall studs. Mounting the panel to the surface is another option, but if you're unsure what the best option is, that's where you can rely on the knowledge of your inspector. Next, we remove the knockout for the cable connector, using the connector to match the opening size that we'll need. So most locations have adopted the National Electrical Code as a baseline, but it can vary, so be sure to check with your inspector before you start.
As far as the circuitry running to feed it, it's a feeder because all wires are one of three things. It's either a service, a feeder, or a branch circuit. So now we're talking about a feeder. We're going to run the wire from the main panel to the sub panel. So let's just say you want 50 amps of load. Well, why don't we run a wire good for about 80 amps? And that would be a number 2 SER. Number 2 is commonly used for 100 amp service, but when you're feeding a sub panel and you go through installation, it has to be derated. It's good for 80 amps. So an 80 amp wire would be a number 2 4-wire SER cable. That's going to have 4 wires in it, 2 conductors, 1 neutral, and 1 ground. If you need 100 amps, then run a 1-aught 4-wire SER cable. Again, that'd be the 2 hots, the neutral and the ground. So when you're at the main panel connecting it, the neutrals and grounds are going to be connected together in the neutral bar, because in the main panel, the neutrals and grounds are bonded together by a bonding strap. Well, when you get to the sub panel, they have to be isolated. So you're going to want to buy a grounding bar to go with this particular panel that you choose, because the 4th wire, that ground, is going to be connected just to the box, and you will not use the bonding strap or the bonding screw that ties the neutral to the grounds.
Now be sure not to over tighten the screws that secure the cable. Install your ground bar to the panel. Remove 2 of the screws from your bus bar so that you can attach your lug adapter. Carefully remove the cable jacket with a utility knife, making sure that you don't damage the wire insulation underneath. Bring the uninsulated ground to the lug adapter and cut the excess with wire or cable cutters. Apply antioxidant compound and secure the ground by tightening the lug screw. Next, we connect the neutral. The neutral is indicated with a white line. Jason's adding a service loop. A service loop leaves a little extra length in the cable for future repairs, but it's not required. Carefully remove 3/4 of an inch of insulation with a utility knife. Repeat the same process to connect both hots to their lugs. The next step is to connect the other end of the cable to the main electrical panel. So here's your safety briefing for that. Now never work on electrical equipment when it's powered. Turn off the main breaker before you open the panel, but keep in mind that if your main breaker is in the panel, everything above the breaker is still powered, even when the breaker's off.
Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about hooking up a sub panel, and I want to show you this is a panel inside the home. It's already a sub panel because there's a disconnect outside. Somebody's added this sub panel and they've used a 4-wire cable, but they did not connect the 4th wire. They cut it off. I don't know if you can see right up here, the bare ground has been cut off. That should have been going to a ground bar that was mounted on one side or the other, so that the grounds and neutrals would be isolated. All the grounds should be mounted to the box. The neutrals should not have this grounding bar here. This is a bonding bar that bonds the cabinet to the neutrals, and it should not be that way in a sub panel. Well, we're adding an additional sub panel in another area. So we've run a 4-wire cable, which is what's required if we want 240 volts out there. And basically this is a number 2 service cable. It's good for 100 amps if you're using it outside for the main service for a house. But when you're using it inside the house, if you go through insulation, it's only rated for 80 amps because you have to derate it. And so we're going to put an 80 amp breaker. If you really wanted 100 amps to your sub panel, you'd have to run a 1/aught aluminum 4-wire cable. I don't believe they make it in a copper. That's the reason I said aluminum. So just be careful with your knife that you don't cut into the insulation of the wire. We've already put a connector in the bottom of the box. You could have your battery drill here and do it with that, but I like to get the exercise. All right, open these up. Basically the hot wires are going to go on this 80 amp breaker. I guess we'll put that on this side right here. Just hook it on the side here. You can see it's got some hooks, and simply push it in. If you have a hard time pushing it in, you could take the butt of your hammer and put it here and smack on the hammer. But certainly you wouldn't want to hit it with the hammer. All right, we're going to run the neutral wire right up here, and you should use an oxide inhibiting compound on the wires. That's to prevent some corrosion.
You only have to do that on aluminum wiring. You don't have to do it on the copper. I do not have my deox with me right this moment, so I'm just going to put it in here kind of temporarily just to show you how it goes. Okay. Do turn the power off when you're doing this. There we go. Get it good and firm. Like I said, I yanked my wire out of my connector here a little bit. Okay, the grounds are going to go, as I mentioned, to a ground bar. And so this is a Siemens panel. So you just try to buy a Siemens ground bar and it'll screw in some holes here. And then all the grounds will have to be relocated to the ground bar, as I mentioned. This will become just strictly a neutral bar and the bond will be removed. So the two hot wires are going to go on the breaker. I'm going to strip about 3/4 of an inch. I want to make sure it goes in all the way. Again, I'm being careful that I don't cut into the aluminum. Just take a pair of wire cutters and grab it, and it'll peel it off the rest of the way. I'll add my deox here in a little while. Wiring a little room addition in the back. We're actually making a room into the garage. And later on, you could check out some videos where we're showing you how to wire up a room. Outlet placement, determining wire size, etc. It's always important. When you take on a project like that and you're wiring into a panel, then here we realize it wasn't done properly from the start. We've got to get these items corrected too, because the inspector will be looking for this. Get in there. Sometimes they make it a little harder to get in. There we go. Always make sure that where the screws are going to be on the cover, that you don't have any wires there, because I've seen it where people have screwed these in and blown these wires up. So that's important. So we're all completed on this except for adding the ground bar and removing the bond strap. We have a 80 amp breaker back at the main service. 4-wire SER came in here. We installed a ground bar on the left side, and the neutrals will all land on the neutral bar, either left or right. These are my circuits I'm getting ready to put in the panel. We ran 3 20-amp circuits over for this salon. And what you do is just find your knockout, give it a little punch with a 1/2-inch hole, give it a twist, grab your wire cutters and pull up on the other piece, then give it a cut. And then you can easily bend them up out of the way. I'm using a 3/4 inch 2-screw connector. I've got 3 wires. Just pull these in here. They are supposed to be stapled. It'll be a little tricky getting the staple on there, possibly. There we go. Okay. You don't want to get these too tight, just snug them, because you can actually pinch them. And the circuits in this salon are required to be arc fault protected because this is a residence. One of the circuits is for the garage, and that's a 20-amp circuit. It does not need to be arc fault protected. However, it's got to be GFCI protected. Strip the wires very carefully so that you don't nick anything inside. And they make some special Romex strippers for this too. Just don't have them with me today. Good sharp knife cuts in there, so just do it very, very gently and take your time. Okay, sometimes you can also, when you get stripped part way, you can just pull it out. It makes it nice and easy. As I mentioned, the ground wires are going to go over here on this ground bar that we installed because this is a sub panel. If you were doing it from your main panel in your house, the neutrals and grounds are all tied together. One thing to remember, you can never double up neutrals. You are allowed to twist ground wires and double those. You can put up to 4 together if they're twisted, and then you can put them in one lug. But the neutral wires, the reason they don't allow you to do that is because if you have 2 different circuits and they happen to be on opposite phases, and you end up loosening that lug where the 2 wires are, you can actually get a 240 volt back feed that'll burn up everything on those 2 circuits. Okay, now I got stripped. I'm going to go ahead and give it a little bit of snug. Okay. Nice to make your wires nice and straight when you can. It only takes an extra moment, and it sure does look nicer. Okay, obviously these can be connected to the breaker when you're ready. I'm going to go ahead and show you put the breaker in. You can just hook it on the side here and then push it in place. All right, we're going to wire up a 20 amp circuit in the garage, GFCI protected. We're going to go from the breaker to the first outlet where we're going to put a GFCI and wire on the load side of the device so that all the other outlets are protected through this device. So here we go. Now from the panel to the first device. Leave yourself about 6 inches of wire hanging out. Okay, you'll notice you don't want to make it too tight, just barely snug. Same way with the connector. Some of you might be wondering the difference between a ground wire and a neutral wire. There's current carried on the neutral wire. So let's just say you've got 10 amps of load on the hot. You'll have 10 amps of load returning in the neutral. The purpose of the ground is so that if something is shorted, say you've got an old refrigerator that's grounded and the compressor gets shorted and it shorts to ground, then it'll cause the breaker to trip. If you have one that's not grounded, the whole outer part of the refrigerator can become energized. That's why years ago they'd open a refrigerator door and if it hit the stove, sometimes it would arc. And that's because it was shorted out and it wasn't grounded. The white wire goes in the neutrals, the brown wire went in the ground, and we're going to cut this hot wire off here. This is a 20 amp breaker because it's a 12 gauge wire. If it were a 14 gauge wire, it would have to be a 15 amp wire. Breaker, excuse me. Okay, that takes care of that. We're going to leave it in the off position. We're going to come down here and strip the wires. Now you have to keep track of which is hot from the feed from the panel and which one goes to the other outlets, because the power wire is the line when you wire in a GFCI. And then the wires going out to the other devices is called load. So if you trip the circuit breaker here, built into this GFCI device, it will then turn the power off to everything downstream. That way you only have to put in one GFI for 4 outlets, saving money. And consequently, all the other outlets have to be labeled as GFCI protected. These GFIs come with the label in the box. It's a sticker. The grounds have to be twisted together and clamped with either a copper Buchanan crimp that's put on with a good crimp, or you can use a green wire nut. I prefer the wire nuts. They're a little bit more expensive, but it is a preference. Sometimes it's hard to get that crimping tool into that box to crimp those wires. That's why I like this. I can get my fingers back there. Okay, so this is my line here. So I'm going to strip these and start with these first. And notice on the back of the outlet, it says right there, line and then the bottom is load. They always come with this tape, so that helps you. And of course you've got the white side here, the neutral's the bigger slot, and the black is on the brass side. So remember, black on brass. You need to crank these down a little bit, but be really careful that it doesn't slip off and gouge you in the hand. Yep, see, I didn't get tight enough. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and do the load side. I'm going to cut these off a little. The GFCI device is a personal protective device. What it does is it monitors the current on the hot and the neutral, so that if somebody's getting shocked, let's say, it recognizes that all the current didn't return, and then it trips. And notice both blacks are on the same side and both whites are on the other side. Okay. And we just got the ground wire left. Now you're allowed to put a GFCI device on a non-grounded circuit. That's actually legal because in essence it does the same thing. It's protecting you. Now we're going to be drywalling this, so I'm not going to go ahead and screw it in the box. But a lot of times you can use this for a temporary receptacle too. So if you're on a job and you want temporary power, do this, plug it in, and then you've got your temporary power.